Okay, so welcome everyone. This is the Hagaddah-less Haggadah share. You do not need Haggadah. We're going to talk about points of the Haggadah that are not in the Haggadah. So I guess the first thing we have to just mention is what's the special mitzvah of the night? The special mitzvah of the night, well, there's Matzah is a special mitzvah and Maror is a rabbinic mitzvah. But the main mitzvah of the night is Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, telling over in detail about the Exodus from Egypt. Now, every day there's a mitzvah of Zecher Yetzias Mitzrayim, which we fulfill in the last paragraph of Shema. That is just to remember that Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim. But on the Seder, we have to do it in length. It's a separate mitzvah. It's called Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. Reb Chaim Brisker, Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, who's the great-grandfather of our Reb Moshe Soloveitchik here. We're fortunate to learn from here. So he said that there are several unique points in which Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, the special mitzvah on Pesach night, is distinct from just recalling the Exodus every day. One of the ways in which the mitzvah on Pesach night is unique is that it requires a question and answer format. The rest of the year, you just have to remember Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim. That's it. But on the Seder night, we have to do it in a way where we ask questions and we answer. Even if you're by yourself for a Seder, you have to ask yourself the questions and then answer yourself. The second way in which it's different is that at the Seder, we have to begin by talking about the lowliness of the Jewish people and then talk about the greatness of the Jewish people. So there's two ways. The Gemara has an argument between Rav and Shmuel. One says we talk about the physical degradation of the Jewish people, that they were slaves. Avadim hayinu lefaro b'mitzrayim, we were slaves, but Hashem took us out. V'yotzienu Hashem Elokeinu. The other opinion is about our spiritual ascension from mitchila ovdei avodah zara hayu avoseinu, our forefathers, Abraham's fathers and antecedents were pagans, but from the beginning of Abraham recognizing Hashem, we became monotheists, and now we serve Hashem. So that's another way in which Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim is different than remembering the Exodus every other night. I think he mentioned a third reason, which I don't recall right now, but possibly another reason, which I don't think he gave this reason, is that on is that on Pesach we have to include Hallel. We have to include praising Hashem when we discuss the Exodus, and the rest of the year we do not. Okay, so the points that we hope to discuss are how many matzahs do we use or not use? Why we do not make a bracha on the mitzvah of Haggadah if there's a special mitzvah. Third point I hope to talk about is who reads the Haggadah. The fourth point is when we pick up a cup in the middle and we say V'hisha Amda, what is that referring to? Fifth thing, why don't we make a bracha on Hallel in the Haggadah? And then the sixth point, which I didn't really want, I didn't really want to discuss it, but you can't give a share on things that aren't in the Haggadah without talking about why Moshe's name is not mentioned. So we'll probably mention a little bit of why Moshe Rabbeinu's name is not mentioned in the Haggadah, just once tangentially. And then if we have time, we'll talk about how many mitzvos we fulfill on the Seder night. So how many matzahs do we have? So there's a machlokus between the Rambam and everyone and most of the other commentators. We use 3 matzahs. According to the Rambam, there's only 2 matzahs. So why do we have 3 matzahs? Well, every Shabbos we always use 2 full matzahs. And on Pesach, we have to break one of the matzahs. Probably because there's the Gemara has a drasha that says lechem oni. Why is matzah called lechem oni, which according to this definition means the poor man's bread? And because poor people, if they got a piece of bread or a piece of matzah, they would break some in half to save some for later. So we have to break the matzah in half during the Seder. So in order that we will still have 2 full loaves for Lecha Mishnah, which means a double loaf, which is to commemorate the Mon. Now, just parenthetically, it is a machlokas between different midrashim and gemaras whether or not a double portion of Mon fell the night before a Yom Tov. Everyone holds a double Mon fell on a Friday before Shabbos, but there's different midrashim that conflict with each other if the Mon fell on Yom Tov, or there was a double portion on Yom Tov, but we use 2 full loaves on Yom Tov also. So for Pesach, in order that we'll have still have 2 full loaves, despite the fact that we broke one, we have 3. So we'll have two full ones, and the middle one is broken. According to the Rambam, though, you're not supposed to have 2 full loaves on Pesach because of the teaching that matzah is poor man's bread, and the poor people would break their matzah apart. We specifically are not supposed to have 2 full matzos. So therefore, you only start with 2, and then you break 1 during the Seder. So you're left with only 1 full matzah and 1 broken matzah. So that's an important point about. So that's an important point about how many matzahs we use. Our custom is to use 3 matzahs. Okay, next point. Why do we not make a bracha on the mitzvah of Haggadah? So the Rashba gives I think it's a Rashba. The Rashba answers that on a mitzvah that has no limit, you do not make a bracha. Now, most people interpret this as no upper limit. For example, giving tzedakah. Why don't we give a bracha, make a bracha when we give tzedakah? And the Rashba's answer is there's not really an upper limit on tzedakah. I mean, there might be an upper limit on the amount of money you're allowed to give at one time, not more than 20% of your wealth, but there's other ways of doing tzedakah and hospitality and friendliness. So because something that has no upper limit, you do not make a bracha. That's the Rashba's opinion. So because on the Haggadah, there's no limit to how much you can discuss about the Yetzias Mitzrayim, as we see that the 5 sages who were studying in Bnei Brak were studying all night long into the morning already. So since there's no limit to it, there's no bracha. That's one answer. I noticed something a couple of days ago. It seems like some say that the Rashba holds when there's no minimum limit, which is an interesting idea, but I don't know that is the accurate interpretation of the Rashba. Okay, another explanation is Kiddush serves as the bracha on the mitzvah. So Kiddush is, in general, declaring this day holy. Kiddush on Shabbos is declaring it Shabbos. On Yom Tov, it's declaring it Yom Tov. So the fact that we call it, we say Yom Chag HaMatzos Hazeh Zecher L'Yetzias Mitzrayim, that we're introducing the holiday of the matzos that we left Mitzrayim. So Kiddush acts as the bracha on the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. Some say if the mitzvah is a bracha, you don't make a bracha on a bracha. So, for example, when we after we eat a meal, we say Berachas Hamazon, because the mitzvah itself is to make a bracha. Berachas Hamazon, you don't make a bracha that you're about to make a bracha. So, I guess according to this opinion, they hold that because we end Magid with a bracha, Asher Galanu, that Hashem redeemed us. So that's a big part of the Haggadah. So you don't make a bracha as a preface to making another bracha about Hashem redeeming us. So far, that's 4 answers. Another answer, the Shibali Aleket says that because we already daven Marav, and in Marav, before and after Kriya Shema, we have 2 brachos before Kriya Shema and 2 brachos after Kriya Shema. The 2 brachos after the first bracha immediately after Kriya Shema is about Hashem taking us out of Mitzrayim and redeeming us, and we actually say that every night in Marav. Every night in Marav after Kriya Shema, the paragraph that starts the Emes V'Amuna, true and faithful is this, and firmly established for us that He is Hashem our God, and there's none but Him, and we are Yisrael, His nation. He redeems us from the power of kings, our King who delivers us from the hand of all cruel tyrants. A couple sentences down, who wrought for us miracles and vengeance upon Paro, signs and wonders upon the land of the offspring of Ham, who struck His anger with all the firstborn of Egypt. So that at the end we say, Baruch Atah Hashem Gal Yisrael, blessed are you Hashem who redeemed Yisrael. So since we mentioned in Berachos Kriya Shema about the Exodus, that also counts as the bracha for over the Haggadah. Some commentators, looks like the Maharal possibly, and Rav Reuven Margolios, who died within the last 100 years, they seem to say a mitzvah that you could do with a thought, you don't need a bracha on, but that's very difficult because as the Rambam and the Sefer Chinuch hold, you have to verbalize the Haggadah. So I don't know, so that it's factually does not seem to fit, because you cannot fulfill your mitzvah of Haggadah by just reading something. You have to speak what you're reading. There's an interesting answer brought in the name of the Chasam Sofer, and that is normally we make a bracha before we do a mitzvah. There is one, is there another one? But there's one giant exception to that, and because of that, a different custom came for a different mitzvah. But someone who converts to Judaism is not able to make the bracha before he converts because he's not Jewish yet, or she is not Jewish yet. So a convert has to make the bracha afterwards. So the Chasam Sofer says, we didn't really become Hashem's nation until we were freed from Mitzrayim. So similar to the fact that a convert isn't Jewish yet, so he can't make the bracha before he goes into the mikvah, he makes it afterwards. So too, we can't make a bracha before we got freed that night. So we don't make a bracha beforehand. And according to that, you could say why there's a bracha of Gal Yisrael at the end of Magid. Okay, so that's several reasons why we don't make a bracha on the mitzvah of Sipur Tzis Mitzrayim. Now, there's one more answer that we have to mention, and that is some opinions do not count Sipur Tzis Mitzrayim as its own mitzvah. Why don't they count Sipur Tzis Mitzrayim as part of its own mitzvah? And the answer is that it's part of the mitzvah of matzah, of eating matzah. So we mentioned already that there's a drasha that why is matzah called lechem oni? It comes from the word ani, a poor person, that it's the bread of poor people, and you have to have a cracked piece. But there is also a different drasha in the Gemara that it's from the word onet, to answer or respond. Matzah is the bread to which we respond many things. We see the matzah, we have to discuss about the Yetzias Mitzrayim. So the mitzvah of Sipur Yitzrayim is concomitant, as Rav Aaron Soloveitchik said, with the mitzvah of matzah. And according to those opinions, if you did not have matzah, you would not have a mitzvah of Haggadah either, because Haggadah, you can't have Haggadah according to those opinions without matzah. So another reason would be is that it's part of the mitzvah of matzah, and we do make a bracha when we eat the matzah. And even though it's true that we say the Haggadah before we eat the matzah, but we need the matzah on the table, we need to point to the matzah at certain places. And actually, according to most opinions, and we'll talk about this maybe a drop more when we talk about the Isha Amda, the matzahs are supposed to be uncovered for the whole Seder because of this halacha, that the Haggadah must be recited over the matzah. Okay. Next point, who reads the Haggadah? Gil Student, who runs the Torah Musings blog, except he calls it now a magazine, not a blog anymore, he posted something with 3 possibilities of who reads the Haggadah, and I'm not going to go lengthy into this, but it's just a good point to point out. There is an opinion that one person could read the Haggadah for everyone, and everyone else has in mind, so the reader has to have in mind that they are fulfilling, they're saying it with the intention to be motzi, that other people could fulfill their Haggadah by listening, and the people who are listening have in mind to fulfill their Haggadah by hearing. So it's similar to someone makes Kiddush and everyone else has in mind when that person's making Kiddush. So, why? Well, they daven loud, but each person usually says it themselves also. So they're okay. Well, we don't pass in that way. The Gemara says that it used to be true a couple thousand years ago, but
let us know if we should hear.
Yeah, so we have a live audience here, so there was a question. So, I mean, if someone has a question, you can raise your hand and unmute also on Zoom there.
You should just repeat the question so those on the
The
Zoom
question
can
was
hear the
that
question.
some shuls, especially some Sephardi shuls in Israel, seem to still have that way, that for davening. But the halacha is that we do not rely on that for davening anymore. People have to say the davening themselves. And in regard to davening, you're able to daven in any language that you understand. So if you don't understand Hebrew, you can daven in a different language. So it's not our topic, but so the first opinion, one opinion is that the person who, it's like Kiddush, just like one person can make Kiddush, have in mind that everyone else will fulfill their obligations by hearing it, and the listeners have in mind that they're fulfilling their obligation by hearing. Same thing with the Haggadah. The problem is that it's a very long time to have in mind for all to have that in mind. The second possibility is that the leader leads and other people should say the Haggadah quietly. So that's a very good practice because of the problem we just mentioned, that it's too hard to have in mind the entire time to listen, that you're listening to everything with the intent to fulfill your mitzvah. So you could say quietly. And then he mentions a third possibility that people take turns, and that is to, he didn't say it this way, but to the fact that we were all freed, so everyone could have a chance to talk about part of being free. It's a very nice thing to show that he, and again, this is the way I'm interpreting that opinion, is that we were all freed, so therefore everyone should have a chance to talk about, to lead part of the Seder, which is about us, each of us being freed. One thing that I think is important to point out, he starts at the beginning by quoting Gemara that they asked students of Rav Yosef who said the Haggadah in Rav Yosef's house, and the answer Rav Yosef did. So they're wondering why one person said it, but there's a separate answer to that, and something that I'm not talking about tonight is who wrote the Haggadah. That is in our it'll be up on the website in a day or so, but we have a compendium of shiurim from the past several years on the Haggadah, and this is one of those in there, the authorship of the Haggadah. But the Haggadah is Torah Shabbat Peh, it's oral law. So in those days, anything that was oral law was not written down. Even benching, Berachas HaMazon, the benching after bread, was considered, and all brachos also were considered Torah Shabbat Peh, oral law, and they weren't written down. So there are Gemaras that not everyone knew benching because it was Torah Shabbat Peh, and not everyone knew it. So it's very likely to say that in the time of the Gemara, the Haggadah itself was still Torah Shabbat Peh, and not everyone knew Haggadah. So that would have been another reason why one person would read the Haggadah. Okay. Going through here, after we talk about the 4 sons, we say, we thank Hashem for keeping his promise to Yisrael, that Hashem calculated the end, like he told Avram that he was eventually going to free us, and he did. And then we pick up the cup and we say, and that which stood up for our fathers and us, that not only one stood up to destroy us, but every generation many stand up against us to destroy us, but Hashem saves us from their hands. So what exactly is the Vihi? So many Haggadah say, because we pick up the cup here, you have to close the matzah. Now, in general, we know that on Friday night, when we make Kiddush, we cover the challah. And the Medrash says, because normally the Bracha Hamotzi would come first, so the fact that we're making Hagafen first over the cup of wine, because that's the way we have a Shabbos meal, by introducing it with Kiddush or sanctifying it with Kiddush. So because we're improperly making a bracha on wine before Hamotzi, we cover the Hamotzi, so the Hamotzi doesn't see, quote unquote, that we're making Kiddush first. So according to that opinion, according to that logic, people say, well, since we're supposed to lift up the cup for Vihisha Amda, we have to cover the matzah. But again, because the whole, like I mentioned a few moments ago, because the Seder is unique in that, according to some opinions, the Haggadah has to be recited because at the time when matzah is in front of us, you shouldn't cover the matzah at any point in the Seder. Maybe Kiddush itself you can, but during Magid, for sure, the matzah should be uncovered. So even if your Haggadah says to cover the matzah when you lift up the cup, I would recommend to, and it's not my own Chiddush, to keep the matzahs uncovered. So why do we lift up the cup for Vihisha Amda? So again, this is a non-explicit thing. So what's the Vihisha Amda representing? So a nice vort that they say is that the word Vihi, Vav, Yud, Hey, Aleph, the Vav is the 6 books of the Mishnah, the Hey is the 5 books of the Torah, the Yud is the 10 commandments, and Aleph is one for Hashem. So because Hashem gave us the Torah, that is what kept us different, and that's why Hashem has saved us, because we keep the Torah, or dedicated to the Torah. There's a few interesting opinions say that there's a halacha that we're not allowed to, anything we eat if it's something that can't be eaten raw, it has to be cooked by a Jew. Now, Ashkenazim have certain leniencies on that. The basic explanation of that is if a Jew turns on the oven or lights the pilot light. Now in our houses, most of our ovens don't have pilot lights, but some commercial ones still have pilot lights. So if a Jew lights the pilot light, so then that's considered that they did part of the cooking. So a Jew could eat that food. But in regard to wine, there's even stricter things that we can't eat wine from non-Jews. And so some say that we lift up the cup to say the fact that we are separating from the non-Jews and don't drink wine with them and don't drink the non-Jewish wine, that is what kept us separate, and that's why Hashem saved us in every generation. Some other reasons why we pick up, some simpler ones is that the Vihisha Amda is just responding to one of the previous paragraphs, such as Hashem's covenant. The covenant is what that Hashem made to Avram is what kept us safe. There's other explanations, but there are other explanations, but that's what I wanted to mention. Okay, so I don't have any questions at this point. If you do, you can unmute and ask. Okay, so this, what I'm about to say now, was not one of the things that I wanted, that was the focus of my speech. But if I'm talking about things that aren't in the Haggadah, the most conspicuous thing that's missing from the Haggadah is Moshe's name. We just mentioned it tangentially at one time that they believed in Moshe and Hashem, and when Hashem struck the Egyptians at the sea and we crossed the sea, then the Jewish people believed in Hashem and Moshe, his servant. So why is Moshe's name not mentioned? So as I mentioned before, the Haggadah is Torah Shabbal Peh. So anything that we have that's Torah Shabbal Peh, even the written Torah was given through Moshe, but by definition, Torah is something that Hashem taught Moshe and Moshe transmitted to us at Har Sinai. So anything that's Torah Shabbal Peh came through Moshe. So Moshe doesn't have to be mentioned because of the fact that we're talking about Torah Shabbal Peh. Moshe is automatically mentioned without, not explicitly, but implicitly. Okay, some other explanations. They mentioned in the name of the Gra, a couple. I didn't. People quote a Gra. I didn't see it this year in the exactly what the Gra said. So one opinion is that if we would mention Moshe in the Haggadah, we'd have to mention him all the time. And if we're mentioning Moshe all the time, people would. It might take away from thinking about what Hashem did everything, and not Moshe. So if we would mention Moshe, we'd have to mention Moshe too much. So therefore, we just don't mention Moshe. And Moshe Soloveitchik's uncle, Rabbi Yisrael Shurin, who was the son-in-law of Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, has an interesting explanation on here also about this point, and based on a Kuzari. There's a famous Kuzari that says Judaism is different than all the other religions. For all the other religions, there was one person or a very small group of people who said that there was some revelation, that God or someone, as a supreme being or something, came to them. And everything spread from there. But Judaism, every Jewish person was at Har Sinai and heard stuff directly from Hashem. So the Kuzari says that Judaism has more authenticity than other religions because of that fact. So Rabbi Yisrael Shurin says that had we mentioned Moshe, people might think that we only know it happened because Moshe told us, and that would reduce the truth of the messaging about Yahadus in general and about Yetzias Mitzrayim at all. We know Yetzias Mitzrayim happened because our ancestor was directly freed, was a slave in Egypt and was freed from Hashem. So if we would mention Moshe, people might think that we only know it because Moshe said so, but that's not true. We know it because every single Jew who was in Mitzrayim was freed, and they told their children, who told their children, who told their children, which eventually we heard it from, which eventually that transmission reached us. So that's another reason why Moshe's name is not mentioned. There's an interesting thing. I'm not sure who it's a Haggadah Be'er Miriam. I don't know who that is. Mentioned interesting thing. They said we would have to fulfill the mitzvah like Moshe. And if Moshe would be telling over the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, would he say, and then I did this, and then I did this? Or would Moshe Rabbeinu say, Hashem did this, Hashem did that, Hashem did the other thing? So he said Moshe would say, Hashem did it. Moshe wouldn't mention his own name in the Haggadah. Some people include the fact that because he's a big Anna, very humble. But even without Moshe being humble, he wouldn't be tooting his own horn. And the way Moshe would have said the Haggadah would be not to mention himself. So we don't mention him either. It's an interesting idea. Other people mention in the name of the Vilna Gaon, also another thing in the name of the Vilna Gaon, that the way that the Paro was finally beaten down, his will was finally beaten down, and he finally said the Jews can go free, was with Makas Bechoros, the plague of the firstborn. And Moshe didn't do anything for Makas Bechoros except tell Paro that it was eventually going to happen. For most of the other Makos, he did something, or Aaron did something, but because Makas Bechoros, which was the final straw that broke Paro's back, Moshe had nothing to do with it. There's no reason to mention Moshe. Okay, so that's a few reasons why Moshe's name is not mentioned in the Haggadah. So as we said, we're going to talk about what's not in the Haggadah. So that was the next thing about what's not in the Haggadah. Okay. The next thing, which is the main point, and then we have some another not as important thing to mention after that, is why we don't make a bracha on halal. So why don't we make a bracha on halal? Now halal we have in two parts in the Seder. At the end of Magid, we mentioned the first two paragraphs of halal, which includes the paragraph of B'tzeis Yisrael Mitzrayim, when Yisrael left Mitzrayim. And then we say the rest of the halal and nishmas and yishtabach after benching on the fourth cup, on the fourth of the four cups of wine. So why don't we make a bracha on halal? So the Machzor Vitri says, since halal is split up, we don't say it all at once. We say it in two different parts. We don't make a bracha on it because it's split up. There's a very famous answer from Rav Hai Gaon. So Rav Hai Gaon says, when there's a difference between, so whenever we say halal, we make a bracha, whether it's Rosh Chodesh, whether it's Yantif, we always make a bracha. The Rambam's opinion and the practice of Sfardim is that they only make a bracha on halal when they read the entire halal. So the entire halal is recited the beginning of Pesach, on Shavuos, the entire Sukkot and Shmini Atzeres, and on Hanukkah. But the days that we only say what we call half halal, which is Rosh Chodesh and the last 6 days of Pesach, since we don't say the whole halal, the Rambam's opinion and Sephardic custom is not to make a bracha on halal. So even without the Rambam's opinion, well, okay, it was not, the Rambam's opinion isn't relevant to what we're going to say, but the Ran in Arvei Pesachim says that there's a difference when you recite halal versus when you're thanking Hashem and responding to a miracle. So if you're doing a mitzvah, you could preface a mitzvah with a bracha. But on Pesach night, we're not saying halal because it's a mitzvah, but because we just imagine that we got freed. Not imagine, we just saw ourselves as having freed. So what should we do when Hashem does a big miracle for us? We should thank Hashem. So the halal there is a reaction to the miracle. If we would say a bracha before that, that would be an interruption between the miracle happening and our thanking Hashem for it. This is the way that Moshe Soloveitchik explains the Ran. With the words of the Ran is there's a difference when you're reading halal versus when you're singing halal. So when the miracle happens, the halal is a song, a spontaneous reaction to the miracle. So when it's a spontaneous reaction, there's no reason to make a bracha. That stops the spontaneity. It interrupts the spontaneity. So that's a very important fundamental answer why there's no bracha on halal at the Seder. Another opinion, and this works for Sfardim, not for Ashkenazim, the Beis Yosef, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, holds that we say halal with a bracha after davening in Shul on the first night of halal. So on the first night of Pesach. So that's only with the minyan. Would you do that? So because we make a bracha on halal in Shul, we don't need to make a bracha on halal at the Seder. According to the Sfardim, if you in Chutz La'aretz, you would make it in the second night also. Now the Beis Yosef at the time when he wrote the Shulchan Aruch was already living in Eretz Yisrael, so he probably only had one day of Yantif. But yes, if you're in Chutz La'aretz, so the question was, if on the second night of Yantif would they also make say halal with a bracha at Shul? And the answer is yes, because everything on the second night is the same as the first night. So yes, they would also make a bracha and say the whole halal in Shul after davening. It seems Aruch HaShulchan mentions that the bracha of Asher Ga'alanu, which we say at the end of Magid, also works as a bracha on halal, even though that's after the beginning of halal. So maybe you could say that since that bracha, so normally we make a bracha at the beginning of halal and at the end of halal. So if Asher Ga'alanu was a bracha at the end of halal, when we pick up halal later in the Haggadah, it doesn't make sense to say a new bracha on halal if we already made a bracha at the end of halal. That's not what he says, but that's a point that we could make. So what we have spoken about until this point was how many matzahs do we use, why there's no bracha on the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, which is the mitzvah of saying the Haggadah. We spoke about who reads the Haggadah. We spoke about some of the significances of Vihisha Amda, picking up the cup, especially to the opinions. Oh, I forgot one of the opinions over there about picking up the cup. So two of the reasons we said of picking up the cup of Vihisha Amda is that the word Vihi represents it because we keep the Torah, and that's why Hashem saved us. So we don't explicitly say that, but the messaging of picking up the cup and Vihisha Amda, that's the message. So that's why it's an unspoken part of the Haggadah, but it's an important point. So that's why it qualifies as in my topic here of the what's not in the Haggadah. Or the other opinion was the fact that we pick up a cup to show that we don't drink non-Jewish wine, and we don't drink wine with non-Jews, so to distance ourselves from having close personal relationships with them and to not intermarry with them. So again, that's by picking up the cup, that's a message that we give, and that's the message of it, even though those words aren't in the Haggadah. So pardon?
Lisora Hartinokos too, no?
What?
Lisora Hartinokos.
Okay, I don't know that that's a reason. Okay. Because why Dafka then? But they also mentioned, because we say this in Havdalah after Shabbos, we say Kos Yisrael Sasa B'Shem Hashem Ekrat. It's a pasuk from Tehillim. I will lift up the cup of salvation in the name of Hashem. I will lift up. So because we're thanking Hashem for saving us, we have to lift up the cup. It's a Kos Yeshua, Kos about Hashem saving us. So that I forgot to mention is another reason of picking up the cup of Vihisha Amdu. Okay, and then we mentioned why Moshe's name is not mentioned, and then why some of the reasons why there's no bracha on Hala. Any questions? Okay, so the last thing I will discuss is it's partially related to the Seder. So Rabbi Chanan Wasserman, who was the Rosh Hashiva Baranovich, he was the Talmud of the Chafetz Chaim and Reb Chaim Brisker. He was killed by the Nazis in 1941 in Kovno, or near Kovno. So he had a tradition that the Vilna Gaon says that there's 64 mitzvos on the night of Pesach, including the Eraisa, Torah mitzvos and rabbinic mitzvos, and also every bracha is considered a mitzvah. So, so what are those mitzvos? So if you think about what we do, we make Kiddush, and Kiddush has two brachas. Hagafen is a bracha, and then the bracha of Kiddush. We say Shachiyanu. Again, he said every bracha is a mitzvah, so what exactly the mitzvah is a different discussion, but because it's a bracha, we can count it. According to the Vilna Gaon, you make a bracha on washing your hands before karpas. So according to him, that's a fourth bracha, and then making the hadama on karpas, and then according to the Vilna Gaon, you make a Borei Nefashos also after that. So according to him, that's 5 and 6. Then at the end of the Haggadah, we say Asher Ga'alanu. So that would be number 7. Then we make a Hagafen over the second cup of the Seder. Then we wash again before Hamotzi. Then we make Hamotzi, and then we make a second bracha Al Achilas Matzah. So that's 10 and 11. And then there's a mitzvah maror, which is only rabbinic in our days. So that would be 12. Now the Rambam has a contradiction, or he changed his mind. I think he originally said that, I forgot which one he said first and which he changed his mind. But earlier in his life, the Rambam either said it's charosis is not a mitzvah, and later he said it is a mitzvah, or vice versa. So charosis might be a mitzvah, but it's not that you have to eat the charosis. It has to be on the table and you have to dip into it, but it's not like you have to eat charosis the way you have to eat matzah. You could say that korech is a mitzvah. In the time of the Beis Hamikdash, obviously Korban Pesach and the Korban Chagiga were mitzvahs. And then benching is 4 brachos. Then the Borei Pri Hagafen, and after benching is another. is what, 17 or 18, and then the Hagafen over the fourth cup would be probably 19, and then the after bracha, the Berei Nefashos, would give you 20. So where does the Vilna Gaon get 64 brachos? So that's not so clear. I think I saw somewhere once, but I don't have. This is speculative. I think I saw somewhere in the name of the Gra, but I don't know where. I don't have a record of it. Is that in a nishmas we use nine. We have 9 expressions of thanks to Hashem. We say 5 more minutes. I don't remember if it was in Nishmas or it was in Yishtabach, which we say after that. In the Yishtabach, there's actually 15. Is there 15? Shiur, Shvacha, song and praise, Halav Zimra, a different type of praise and songs, Ozum and Shala, strength and being a ruler. So either there or in Nishmas, there are multiple recitations of thanks. So it could be that you get multiple types of halal of thanking Hashem from that. And then a different thing I thought of is that when the Vilna Gaon said every bracha is its own mitzvah, is it every bracha or even every baruch? In which case, when we say Baruch Hamakom Baruch Hu, right before the 4 sons, that could be a few more. So still, it's hard to add up to 64. So Moshe Sternbach, who's the Rav of the Grushel in Harnof and Dayan in Yerushalayim, he has a possible list. So I'll read this quickly. Kiddush on wine, because on a Torah level, Kiddush doesn't have to be on wine, but rabbinically it has to be on wine. So the fact to make it on wine is an extra mitzvah. Making the bracha Berei Pri Hagafen, the actual bracha of Kiddush, because according to most opinions, you say today is special because it's Pesach, or today is special because it's Shabbos. That's good enough for Kiddush D'Oraisa. But to say the bracha of Mekadesh HaShabbos is another bracha. So he mentions a bunch of mitzvahs like that. So I don't know that I wouldn't have counted them as different mitzvahs, but the points that he makes are true. Then mentioning Yetzias Mitzrayim, that we say Zechel Yetzias Mitzrayim in Kiddush, is mentioning Yetzias Mitzrayim every day. 6 is Shachianu. 7 is drinking the cup. So, which is a rabbinic mitzvah. The 8th is leaning. So that's true. Leaning is a mitzvah of the night, according to Machlokas Yishonim, if it's its own mitzvah or part of the mitzvah of eating and drinking. The 9th is washing your hands before the karpas. Number 10 is making a bracha on the Til Sidayim, which again is the Vilna Gaon Shita, but it's not what we do. Making the Berei Pri Adama on the karpas vegetable. Eating the karpas is a mitzvah. 13 is dipping the karpas. 14 is making the bracha achrona on the karpas, which again, we don't make a bracha achrona, but the Vilna Gaon's opinions do. Possibly, then 15 is having the roasted bone on the Seder plate to remember the Korban Pesach. Number 16 is having the egg to commemorate the Korban Chagiga. Then 17 is breaking the middle matzah. It's a rabbinic mitzvah. Number 18, the son asking the manishtana. 19, speaking about the Yetzias Mitzrayim. 20 is when we talk about the miracle to start in our disgrace and then end up with our praise. 21, saying the Haggadah over the Matzah. 22, mentioning Pesach Matzah Maror, the famous statement of Rabbi Gamliel. Number 23, that we have to view ourselves as having left Egypt. 24, thanking Hashem on the miracle of leaving Mitzrayim. 25, making the bracha Asher Galanu at the end of Magid. 26, making Berei Pri Hagafen on the second cup. 27, drinking the second cup. 28 is leaning at the second cup. So again, I don't know that, again, leaning would be 4 mitzvahs of leaning and 4 mitzvahs of the 4 cups. There's a 1 mitzvah, 4 cups, or each of the cups of mitzvah. To get to 64, Moshe Sternbach assumes they're all the mitzvahs, so he can get to 64 here. Then 29, washing your hands for the matzah, making a bracha on the Netilas Yadayim. 31 is making the hamotzi bracha. 32 is making the bracha on the mitzvah of eating matzah. 33, having lecha mishnah, which according to the fact that we have a broken matzah is not clear that we fulfill lecha mishnah on Pesach night. Certainly according to the Rambam, we don't. 34, eating matzah. 35, eating a second kazayas. So on Pesach night, it's best to eat a kazayas at the beginning and then a kazayas for afikomen. Leaning when you eat the matzah. And then 37 is having a yontif meal, a festive meal. 38 is making a bracha for maror. 39 is for actually eating maror. Number 40 is for bringing charosas to the table. 41 is dipping the maror in the charosas. 42 is eating the sandwich, the matzah and maror sandwich. 43 is leaning when we eat that. 44 is eating the afikomen. 45, and again, I don't know why if he's adding this for a third time, to eat an additional kazayas of matzah. So I guess the last thing we taste is matzah. Leaning, 46, leaning when we eat the afikomen. 47, washing our hands, mayim achronim, before we bench. Benching on a cup is 48. Having a mezumin is 49. And then the 4 brachos of benching are 50, 51, 52, and 53. 54 is the borei priagafen for the 3rd cup. 55 and 56 are drinking the 3rd cup and leaning for the 5th cup. The 57 is halal. 58 is responsive reading of halal if you have multiple people there, like repeating Hodu, Lashem Kitov, things like that. 59 is making a bracha at the end of halal. It's a machlokas Ashkenazim and Sfardim. If it's Malch Mulava Tishbachos or Malch Alchei Olamim. 60 is making hagafen on the 4th cup. 61 is drinking the 4th cup. 62 is leaning for the 4th cup. 63 is making the after bracha for the 3rd cup. And 64 is being happy for the night of the Seder. That's for Moshe Sternbach's list of 64. Some of them seem to be a little bit of a stretch in my opinion. Then there is someone, this is the last point, Rav Shmuel Haminer lived in Yerushalayim many decades ago, and he wrote a set of Chumashim that has, he tries to say every mitzvah that we see from Chumash. Some are clearly, there's only 613 Torah mitzvahs, but there's a lot of rabbinic mitzvahs. So he has a Chumash where he does that. He has something for the Leil HaSeder. I think he has almost 150, but if you look, some of them, a lot of them have nothing to do with the Seder. The fact that we destroyed our chametz before Pesach, the fact that we don't eat chametz, the fact that we eat matzah, the fact that we're not doing malacha, the fact that we are refraining from malacha, meaning what's a positive commandment, what's a negative commandment, there's a way to walk out of shul properly, a lot of things in here. So he mentions over 100 mitzvos. Ivdos Hashem b'simcha, serve Hashem with happiness. Ivdos Hashem b'yira, serve Hashem with awe, with reverence. So a lot of these have nothing to do with the Seder itself, but some of them are things you're supposed to do every day. So it's an interesting list. So he lists, I think it's almost 150. I only have a chunk of it here. I have here from number 7 through 108. And he's still going. I think he has 150. So it's not in the Haggadah about how many mitzvahs we could fulfill that night related to Pesach. Obviously, not killing and not stealing are mitzvahs that we fulfill that night too, but you fulfill them not by doing something. So it makes sense when the Vilna Gaon says there's 64 mitzvahs, those are things we do, not things that we refrain from doing, like not having chametz in the house. So thank you all for being here. If you have any questions, please ask right now. Unmute yourself.
Thank you.
Yeah, question? Yeah, after show we'll do it, okay? That's a reminder, sell your comments. No, well, one answer was because we split halal. We don't say it in one unit. We say part of it in Magid and part of it after benching. So because it's split up, we don't make a bracha on it. If you did do it in one unit, it would be you'd make a bracha. I think that was the first one I mentioned. Okay. Good evening, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.